All right, let's dive right into SpaceX and their upcoming Starship Flight 8. It's scheduled for February 28th, and this one is, well, this one's important. It's not just like another ho-hum test flight, is it?
No, not at all.
We're talking about tech that could completely change how we get to space. Like, think about it. More Starlink launches, maybe even,
More frequent for sure.
yeah, even missions to Mars. And to really get into it, we've got a ton of interesting stuff to go through today. Articles.
The research papers.
Oh, yeah. There's even a research paper that analyzes debris from the first Starship orbital test. So, strap in.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, let's start by rewinding a bit back to Flight 7. What a show that was, huh?
It was something else.
I mean, that booster landing, they used those, what do they call them, the chopstick arms? It was like something right out of a movie.
Oh, for sure. Visually, it was incredible. But the real story of Flight 7 is what happened with the upper stage.
Yeah, what happened there?
Well, there's a propellant leak.
Basically, fuel leaking out where it shouldn't.
Exactly. Which led to fires and ultimately the stage breaking apart.
So that was a bit of a setback.
Yeah, you could say that.
Mm.
But it really showed just how complex and intense this kind of space flight is.
I mean, I guess when you're pushing the boundaries of technology.
Exactly. Setbacks are going to happen. The key is what you learn from them.
And it sounds like SpaceX has been busy learning from that for this next Flight 8. What have they changed on the upper stage?
Well, they've made a number of adjustments, like to the fuel feed lines and the propellant temperatures. Plus, they've added a whole new purge system. It's designed to basically clean out any leftover propellant vapors, reduce the chance of leaks or accidental ignition.
So they're really focused on safety this time.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with a vehicle as powerful as Starship, safety has to be the top priority. And it's not just SpaceX that's thinking about that. Remember the FAA grounded Starship flights after Flight 7, and they launched a multi-agency investigation.
Right, I remember reading about that.
You can bet they're under a lot of scrutiny.
And it's got to be even tougher with the goals SpaceX has set for Starship, right?
Exactly. They want to have a whopping 25 Starship launches just this year.
Wait, 25?
You heard that right.
To put that in perspective, wasn't that more than double?
More than double all the orbital launches in 2023.
Wow. 25 launches. Is that even possible?
It's ambitious, that's for sure. Some experts even doubt they can pull it off. But you got to remember, SpaceX is all about moving fast and learning as they go.
They're not afraid to try things, even if they fail.
Well, they don't see it as failure. They see every launch as a chance to learn something new.
That reminds me, we have that research paper, the one about the debris from the first Starship orbital test.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating one.
I mean, why study debris?
Well, it might seem strange, but it's actually super valuable. See, by analyzing the debris field, researchers can learn a lot about how the vehicle performed during launch. They can pinpoint areas for improvement.
So each piece of debris is like a little clue.
You got it. It helps them refine their designs, strengthen materials, and improve their procedures.
It's all about learning and adapting, huh?
That's the SpaceX way.
It's pretty different from the traditional kind of slow and careful approach to spaceflight, isn't it?
Yeah, you could say that.
It's like they're taking that Silicon Valley move fast and break things thing and applying it to rocket science.
There's definitely an element of that there. But it's not reckless. They're constantly analyzing data, managing risks, and making adjustments based on what they learn. And of course, safety is always a top priority.
It's amazing to see how it's all playing out. They've already done some pretty incredible things with Starship, and Flight 8 is looking like another big step forward.
No doubt. This flight's also going to be the first time they tried deploying payloads from Starship.
Oh, right.
They're using 10 Starlink simulators to test out the system.
Wait, Starlink simulators?
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, they're basically dummy payloads. They're designed to mimic the size and weight of the real Starlink satellites.
Oh, I see.
So they can test the deployment mechanisms without risking the real expensive hardware.
Smart.
It's a crucial step towards making Starship a workhorse for launching all sorts of satellites.
So with Flight 8, we've got a lot to keep an eye on. The redesigned upper stage, another attempt at catching the booster, and now this payload deployment test. And all of this is happening while they're still aiming for 25 launches this year.
It's going to be a busy year for Starship, that's for sure. And every flight, whether it's a success or not, brings us closer to a future where space travel is routine, not just a dream, a reality.
We've been getting into the details of Starship Flight 8, and I think you can see why this mission is so important. But let's take a step back for a second. SpaceX wants to launch Starship 25 times this year. What does that tell us about their overall strategy?
Well, it's all about speed. and learning. They're embracing this idea of rapid iteration, pushing the limits and learning from every single launch, whether it's a success.
Or a setback, like the Flight 7,
Exactly. It's very different from how aerospace development has been done traditionally.
which is usually a lot slower and more careful, right?
Yeah, lots of planning, not a lot of risk-taking.
So SpaceX is basically saying, let's just launch and see what happens.
Not just see what happens. They're gathering real-world data from each flight and using that to improve their designs.
So each flight is like an experiment.
Precisely.
And they've made a lot of progress this way in a pretty short time. But can they keep this up? Is there a risk to moving this fast?
Well, there are always risks when you're pushing the boundaries like this, especially with something as complex as spaceflight.
Right.
Some people say that this fast pace could lead to mistakes, things getting overlooked.
Which could compromise safety.
Right. But SpaceX says that their testing and data analysis are thorough enough to mitigate those risks.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But one thing's for sure, SpaceX is definitely shaking things up. The whole space industry is having to rethink how they do things. We've talked a lot about Starlink. But what about Starship's role in NASA's Artemis program? How does this massive spacecraft fit into the plan to send humans back to the moon?
Well, Starship could be a real game changer for lunar missions. It's just so big, and it can carry so much. Think about it. You could send habitats, scientific equipment, even rovers, all in one go.
Wow.
That would make it much easier and cheaper to build a permanent base on the moon.
So it's not just about sending a few astronauts to hop around on the surface.
No, we're talking about building a real, lasting infrastructure.
And NASA's actually chosen Starship as the lunar lander for Artemis III, right?
Yes, they're going to modify it a bit, but it's essentially Starship.
The mission that will land the first woman and the next man on the moon. That's incredible. It seems like Starship is the key to a whole new era of lunar exploration. Imagine a permanent research station on the moon, with scientists and engineers working there all the time, doing all sorts of groundbreaking research, maybe even preparing for missions to Mars.
It's an exciting possibility, and Starship makes it seem achievable. But we have to remember that there are still huge challenges ahead. Sending humans to the moon and back safely is no easy task.
Definitely. There's still a lot of work to do.
Right.
But even with those challenges, there's so much excitement around Starship. It feels like we're on the verge of a major breakthrough. Speaking of breakthroughs, let's go back to that research paper about the debris from Starship's first orbital test flight. Why is it so important to study debris?
Well, you can think of debris analysis as a kind of forensic investigation. But for spacecraft,
Interesting.
by looking at the size, shape, and material of the debris, researchers can figure out what happened during the flight.
Like putting together a puzzle.
Exactly.
Each piece of debris is a clue.
Right. This kind of analysis can tell us about the structural integrity of the spacecraft, how the engines performed.
And the stresses it experienced during launch and flight.
Yeah, all of that.
So they can figure out where the design needs to be improved.
And if there are any changes needed to the operational procedures?
So even a tiny piece of debris can help make Starship better.
Absolutely. It shows how committed SpaceX is to continuous improvement.
They're not just satisfied with launching rockets, they want to learn from every single flight.
And make space travel safer and more accessible.
Which brings us back to their goal of 25 Starship launches this year. We've talked about the technical challenges, the regulations, and the impact on lunar missions. But what about the bigger picture? What could this rapid development mean for the future of space exploration as a whole?
Well, if SpaceX succeeds, if Starship lives up to its potential, it could completely change our relationship with space.
How so?
Imagine a world where going to space is routine, not just for governments and billionaires.
A world where anyone can go to space.
Exactly. We're already seeing more private companies getting involved in space.
Like with satellites and space tourism.
Right. And Starship could make that trend explode. It could usher in a whole new era of space exploration.
It's an incredible thought.
But also a little daunting.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine what that world would look like. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. And it's clear that Starship is a huge leap forward in space technology. It's also a huge leap in ambition. Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, let's recap what we've talked about so far.
We looked at SpaceX's strategy of rapid iteration, the pros and cons of their aggressive timeline. We talked about Starship's role in NASA's Artemis program and how it could help us build a permanent base on the moon. And we talked about how important debris analysis is for improving spacecraft.
It's been a fascinating journey so far. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the broader implications of Starship's development and what it means for the future of space travel. Okay, we're back and ready for the final part of our deep dive into SpaceX's Starship. We've covered so much already, it's hard to believe. Flight 8, those 25 launches they're aiming for this year. SpaceX is really pushing the limits, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
But let's step back even further now. Let's say Starship really is the game changer they think it is. What does that mean for us, for how we see space and our place in it?
It's a big question, isn't it? Think about it. What if traveling beyond Earth becomes normal? Not just for astronauts or billionaires.
Right, like what if it was like, I don't know, like booking a flight across the
Yes,
ocean?
exactly.
It's mind-blowing, like those old sci-fi movies with space hotels and moon bases.
It might be closer than we think. With Starship, launches would be cheaper and more frequent.
Mhm.
That could create a whole new space economy.
Like space tourism.
Exactly. Companies could offer trips to orbit, even to the moon.
Wow, now I'm really picturing those old sci-fi book covers.
But ones with sleek spaceships and cities under domes.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that could actually happen.
It's exciting, though, isn't it? That human desire to explore, to push the boundaries.
It's in our nature, but it's more than just tourism, right? We've talked about the science, but what about the economics of it all?
Oh, the economic potential is huge,
Yeah.
and we've barely scratched the surface.
What kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, think about satellites. Building them, launching them,
Okay.
space-based solar power,
Hmm.
asteroid mining, even manufacturing in microgravity.
Asteroid mining.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
all of these industries could take off with Starship.
I mean, the resources we could access.
It's almost unimaginable.
But we're talking new jobs, new technologies,
It's a whole new frontier.
and Starship is the key.
It could be.
But we have to think about the other implications too, right? The geopolitical ones. I mean, space has always been about competition,
Yeah.
national pride, that kind of thing. How could Starship change that?
It's a good question. As space becomes more accessible, more countries, even companies, could become major players.
So we could see new alliances, new rivalries.
Exactly.
It's like the early days of the internet all over again. No one knew who would be in control.
And this time, it's about space.
It's a time of huge potential, but also risk.
Absolutely. That's why these conversations are so important.
We need to think critically about what we're doing.
And work together to make sure space exploration benefits everyone.
Well said. And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive. Give you the information you need to understand what's going on. We've talked about Starship, SpaceX's goals, and the bigger implications of all of this.
We've covered the technical details, the excitement of Flight 8, the potential for a moon base, a new space economy, even how this could change the global landscape.
So much to think about. As we wrap up, here's a final thought. If SpaceX actually launches Starship 25 times this year, will we look back at 2025 as the year space travel changed forever? The year we truly started to become a multiplanetary species?
It's an exciting possibility.
Only time will tell, but it's definitely happening now. The future of space exploration is unfolding right in front of us.
Full of wonder and challenges and a whole lot of unknowns.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Starship.
It's been a pleasure.